We just said that.
Yeah.
We said
The whole party. Like, she's gonna leave us again? Can't you hold chair? She was over here.
Dad's gonna struggle with that.
I've told them for a long time in my entire career, who's going to take care of the yard? That's like my house. Who's going to provide financial support, and then Jane will just leave it.
We have a lot of this stuff filled out, but it's easy to go over. Yeah.
I think I'm going to get us rolling. So
You think so?
I think so. Just give a little, maybe a 2-minute warning. Right now, I don't think there's anybody else in the parking lot. I was thinking closer to 9:15, but I feel like people are here. Just want to make sure nobody's like walking in right now. Okay, maybe we're good, and if
I'll stand there.
yeah. I'll give like a 2-minute. For real. Good morning, everybody. Hey, I just want to give kind of a 2-minute warning here. We are going to begin shortly, but if you did not pick up the 2 handouts at the door when you came in, pop back there by Joanne, and she will get that into your hands. Go ahead, grab coffee, some refreshments, and I will be back in about a minute and a half. All right. Well, good morning, and we are ready to get on with our workshop here. Thank you for taking time to be part of In Case of Emergency Break Glass. I've said many times throughout the weeks of promoting this, it'd be well worth your time. It was a few years ago that I had the privilege of sitting in Karolyn Olson's workshop at Wapaka, and I also think Dan and Amy, you sat in it, and they're here today to go through it one more time. But then, when I sat through it then, I knew we were going to be bringing this here to Christian Life Church. So, Karolyn Olson has spent much of her life trying to keep others organized. That's kind of her mantra in life. As ministry coordinator in the tech and music department of Cedar Valley Church in Bloomington, Minnesota for 7 years, and most recently as the director of advancement for 3 Christian entertainers, she specializes in taking care of details to make sure events run smoothly. I wanted to hire you at that moment. Karolyn and her husband Denny, we're thrilled to have you with us this morning. They live on Spencer Lake, just outside of Wapaka, Wisconsin here. So also, important information, they are the parents of 2 and the grandparents of 5. That's important information. So with that, would you guys give a warm welcome to Karolyn Olson as she comes to share with us this morning.
Just got to look at everybody, take a minute and look at everybody. I am so happy to be here this morning. And Pastor Rich and Sharon were associate pastors under my dad, who was pastoring at Green Bay at the time. And so I was already out of the house, so I don't know them real well from that kind of a setting, other than I know that they are faithful and they're people of integrity, and it's just such a privilege to be invited to come here this morning. I am Assembly of God pastor's child, preacher's kid. My husband is an Assembly of God preacher's kid from Minnesota. On Saturday nights, I was folding bulletins in Wisconsin. He was folding bulletins in Minnesota. In the summer, I was going to Spencer Lake Bible Camp in Wisconsin. He was going to Lake Geneva Bible Camp in Minnesota. So we have had parallel lives growing up. And we ended up meeting and marrying when we were working at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. So strange things people told me, don't go to Mayo Clinic, there's no guys there. The guys that are there are all doctors and they have no time for women. You'll never find a husband if you go to Mayo Clinic. And I met him in the lab. So God has a strange way of winding everything together. So I printed off funeral jokes. And I said that I wouldn't say anything unless I judged the crowd to be okay. So you've passed the test. I won't read a bunch of them, but Dad always thought the last thing he needed was a burial plot. He was right. Elon Musk. You know Elon Musk? I'd like to die on Mars, just not on impact. Will glass coffins be a success? Remains to be seen. All right. One more here. At the boss's funeral, a disgruntled employee kneeled next to the coffin and whispered, "Who's thinking outside the box now, Gary?" Oh, it's good to be able to laugh about some subjects that are sometimes a little hard to deal with and talk about. So the purpose of this is really to help alleviate anxiety and reduce stress on for your family and friends in case of an emergency. You've all seen in case of emergency break glass. That's kind of what this is. So that when something comes up, you are prepared. You know that there's something there that's going to help you. And so this is going to help you know what documents you need in a crisis. It'll help you to get organized ahead of time. And it'll just teach you how you can take the lead for your family in helping to organize these things. We don't like to talk about any of this because we're afraid that we're going to actually die right after that. I don't know what there is about that, but I also know that the last time you want to talk about it is when your loved one is in a critical situation. You don't want to be bringing that up because you don't want to feel like you're taking their hope away. And to be, having somebody suffer something traumatic and then you start all of a sudden saying, oh man, we need to be making funeral plans. That's not the time to do it. That's a really stressful time for that. So if you can make yourself go ahead and take the time now just to organize things, to get things in order. And I will say, I'm not making money off of this material. I have found this to be a very useful handout and notebook. It's not original material. I've gotten permission from the author to be able to present this. So I'm not making anything, so don't feel like you got to buy anything or do anything. That's kind of what the checkoff list is about that you have in your hands, so that you can organize things on your own if you choose to, or if you choose to actually download a PDF with more detailed information. I'll tell you about that at the end. But this is not a sales pitch at all. I found this to be a very, very helpful activity for us. Okay, why get organized? Chances are that one day you'll die. Or the Lord will come and it won't really matter, but you'll be ready anyway. Not preparing ensures that at least one person will say mean things about you after you're gone because they have to handle your mess. And they're going to be saying mean stuff like, why didn't they prepare for this? And your family may lose a lot of money just because of legal costs. Things are expensive, and having everything organized ahead of time can help you with that. Okay, introduction to Mary Kelly. Her husband was dead only 55 days after he was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and that was not the time to talk about anything, and she thought that they were pretty well organized, and they were not. So I want to give you a quick little quiz here. Give yourself one, Okay, so it's not quite loud enough then, okay? All right. Give yourself 1 point for every question that you can answer correct on this one, okay? 1 point. Number 1, I have a will and my family knows where it is. Number 2, in the event of an emergency or evacuation, I could grab all of my important papers in less than 1 minute. Number 3, I have a designated personal representative who knows my burial and memorial wishes. 4, if both my spouse and I were suddenly gone, there are instructions with my friends and neighbors regarding the immediate care of my children, if you have them, or my mom, if you have one living with you. Number 5, my pets are provided for. Number 5, my pets are provided for in my will or trust. Number 6, I have updated my will or trust within 3 years. If nothing has changed in 5 to 10, that's okay, but you at least need to take a look at it. Number 7, all of my insurance papers are updated in one central area, and my personal representative knows where to find them. Number 8, my wishes for organ donations are written down and known to my family and friends. Number 9, I have a healthcare power of attorney. And number 10, a list of all my key advisors, including my religious leader, my financial planner, my insurance agent, my doctor, my lawyer, and others are in a key location. Okay, so from that, how many got 5 or more? Oh, you got a couple. Awesome. How many had at least 1? Okay, you're doing pretty good. You're pretty good. So a lot of these, it seems almost like overkill, but I'm going to touch on each one of these as we go. The notes are for you. I just did a PowerPoint printout so that you can write your notes on the printout. If you have any questions, we'll ask them at the end. So, because some of these will be covered as I get going, but if you have questions, just jot them down on the side of your notes, and I will be happy to answer those at the end if I'm able. Okay, slide. Location. Your family and friends need to know where to find your information, and often they find your information too late. And you have written down that you want to be cremated and your ashes spread over your favorite campground, and they didn't know that, and that wasn't communicated, and it's too late. So a couple of things. Safe deposit boxes are not good places to store your information because often it takes a death certificate in order to even get into them. And if your information is all locked in there, that doesn't really do you any good. You can use a fireproof file cabinet or a small safe as long as somebody knows how to get into it. Your important person needs to either know the combination or where the key is for that. That's a good location. Legal documents like wills and trusts can be maintained and kept with your lawyer, but your loved ones must know who that lawyer is and how to get a hold of that information. So the first important document I'm going to talk about is a letter of instruction, and it's kind of an all about me document. You can just write this out. You don't need a lawyer for this. It goes out to your personal representative, and when I say personal representative, that's the point person that you designate who's going to kind of handle things after you go, or if there's an emergency that you're incapacitated. You can send out another letter to your siblings and other people that have general information, but it's kind of good not to have too many of these out there because, as we'll talk about, you got to change this sometimes. The things that I'm writing this year may not be exactly like if I was 90 years old, and if you have too many copies of stuff out there, it gets confusing. So just make sure that at least your personal representative, maybe one other people, has a letter of instruction. And in this, it's consider what has to happen right away for someone to assume your responsibilities. If I wasn't here to do this, what would not get done? Have a conversation with your spouse if you've got one, so that they know. Some of these can be a little uncomfortable. Nobody wants to really talk about this. It doesn't take long, at least to keep each other apprised. You may assume that you're doing things exactly like your spouse would. Don't make those assumptions. That's a bad assumption. Consider where the spare key, things like where the spare key is, security system details, certain family members that need to be contacted, taking care of the children, taking care of our seniors, where important legal documents are, burial wishes. This is just like a 1 or 2 page letter, just kind of detailing where to find stuff. In my letter of instruction, I have where my healthcare directive is. I have where my life binder is, and the life binder, I put a copy on the back table here. That one's not filled in, so you're not going to have to worry about my personal information. But in my letter of instruction, I say my life binder is upstairs in my bedroom. It's on the 3rd shelf of my bookcase. If anything happens to me, that's where to go to get it. You may want it in the basement if you're in a tornado-prone area. You may want to keep your life binder constantly in the basement instead. But that's an important place to start with your letter of instruction. Okay, will. So I'm going to preface this by saying I am not an expert on wills and trusts, so if you have questions about which is better for your situation, I'm not the one to do it. I'm an organizer. I'll help you put it in the right order, but I am not one to answer the legal questions. But I'll just touch on a couple of differences between the two so that you know. A will describes legally how your estate should be distributed. Without a will, the state and not you will decide what happens to your home and your money and possessions and children. A will is a legal state-specific document that appoints a trustee or personal representative to manage your affairs. Without one, the state and not you decides what happens to your home and money, possessions, and children. So there are cheaper software programs, LegalZoom, some of these others, that can help you write a will. And I will say that I've been instructed that many of these really don't stand up well in court if there's an issue. If it's kind of clear-cut and there's not really a lot of stuff going on, sometimes this can be okay. But often it's cheaper in the long run just to do it right and just have a lawyer help you with some of these things. Months of legal fees can add up if you've got anything that's going into probate and taking any, and I don't know if any of you can attest to that, but I do know some kind of sad situations because of not having a will. Okay, the second one is a trust then. So a trust, you can have one trust per couple. So a will is one per person. A trust is one per couple. And most trusts are formed to protect estates from tax liabilities, from unwanted predators and creditors. It can avoid lengthy and sometimes expensive probates. And it can keep the contents of an estate private. And for some people, that's really important, so that people don't know your worth, people don't know the circumstances of selling your house, any of those kind of stuff. If it's kept within a trust, it's a lot more private. It simplifies a lot, it eliminates a lot. It's more expensive to get a trust organized than it is a will, generally. A will, if you have a will, it flies through that process and says see trust. So anything that's in a will, it just automatically says see trust. It's within a fence, and all of your assets are within this fence called the trust. Do I need a trust? Not everybody necessarily needs a trust. If you have multiple properties, if you have anything that's going to get sticky, if you have weird relatives who are going to be fighting over stuff, a trust is a really good way to go for that. You don't have to have a certain amount of money in order to have a trust. It just is a different way of going. Okay, let's talk about power of attorney. The power of attorney grants another person the authority to act on your behalf and to administer your personal affairs. It has to be done before a person becomes incapacitated. That's kind of the key. If a person does not have the capacity to execute a power of attorney and does not already have a durable power of attorney in place, the court imposes a conservatorship. So a power of attorney can be written up by you, but it does need to be notarized. If it's not notarized, it doesn't matter how many times you've said, my kids are going to be taking care of things. It has to be notarized and put into writing. There's a couple different kinds of power of attorney. A special power of attorney is one, like for a one-time event. Say you're going to Europe and you want somebody here in the United States to be able to take care of things because you're going to be going through the mountains someplace inaccessible. You can grant a temporary power of attorney to somebody for a limited period of time. General power of attorney have total control over legal affairs, like selling your home or paying your bills, making decisions about your business or investments. It's important if you get a power of attorney, when you get a power of attorney, make sure you trust that person. It's not an easy decision. You want to make sure that you've got somebody responsible. And the third kind is a medical power of attorney, and that's actually separate from the general power of attorney, often. So in our case, like my mom is 92 years old. She's in an assisted living. She has my brother as power of attorney, so he's going to take mostly care of the financial aspect, and then I am actually her power of attorney for medical, because I have a stronger medical background and she trusts me to make those kinds of decisions. So it doesn't have to be the same person for your general power of attorney for financial versus medical. Okay, let's talk a little bit about healthcare advance directives. So a power of attorney for healthcare, you need somebody to be able to make decisions, and this again is if you're incapacitated. Some people get nervous about having a power of attorney for their medical because they're afraid their kids are going to put them in some place that they don't want to go. And the power of attorney for medical only kicks in if you are deemed incapacitated by 2 doctors, or you are just obviously unconscious, you're unable to respond. It doesn't kick in until you are incapacitated. So let that take some of the fear out of it for you. One thing is, if a person is found incapacitated, the legal recourse has to happen where somebody is assigned a conservatorship for that person, and that is beyond your control. Somebody may think your son is the obvious choice, They don't know that he's not the obvious choice. You know that he's not the obvious choice. So make sure that this is taken care of in writing. A general power of attorney does not cover health care. Wisconsin is not a next of kin or family consent state for adults. This means that family members are not authorized to make decision for capacitated or incapacitated adult family members. Wisconsin law considers family members, including spouse, as strangers for decision-making purposes. This is a common misconception and one that can be difficult to work with if you're assuming your husband is just going to be the one who's assigned, because Wisconsin is not that way. It's a state-by-state kind of a legality. Yes? It's whoever is is actually written down there, and the paperwork supersedes anything else that's actually there. There may be practical aspects to that, and usually these power of attorneys, there's a first and a second tier. So they almost always, it's not only just one person, it's like a second tier, so that it's. I think it goes, as I understand it, it goes to the first person if that person is alive, whether they are immediately with you or not. So, again, I'm an organizer, so we'll see how this goes. When planning healthcare directives, think about long-term health insurance. If you have a history of cancer in your family and everybody that you know has had issues, you may want to consider a long-term health care insurance policy for these things. Sometimes it's a little bit expensive. It's just another thing for you to consider as you're going through documents and you're making your plans for the future. This is important. A power of attorney for health care document only goes into effect if a person is found to be incapacitated as determined by 2 medical doctors or 1 medical doctor and a licensed psychologist stating the person is unable to receive and evaluate information effectively. So, on the document, there is a designated place for a statement of desires, special provisions or limitations, and your health care agent must be consistent with the wishes you express here. So there's a couple things with this. I have written down, I don't want to be in pain. I don't want to be in pain, meaning if a decision has to come where I am in an end-of-life situation and they say, should we give her morphine to ease her pain, or should we withhold it so that she can stay alive to say goodbye to people? That's a very practical decision-making thing that happens often. I say, and it's written in my requests, I don't want to be in pain. I can say goodbye to my friends. I can say goodbye to my family. I know I'm going to see them in heaven. I don't want to be struggling just to gasp those last couple breaths in order to say goodbye until our daughter gets back from overseas. That's me. This is the place to write those kinds of things down so that if I can't say anything, nobody's trying to guess what I'm doing. Okay. Okay, let's go on to healthcare advance directives. A healthcare power of attorney is different than a living will. Often people use those terms interchangeably. A living will is only used in end-of-life situations. A living will is directed to physicians. And so an example of this, if you have a stroke and you are incapacitated and unable to respond, This is not necessarily a living will situation at this point because you can recover. So this really falls under the category of your advance directives on how you want to be handled. But a living will then is directed to the physicians to withhold feeding tubes, those types of things in an end-of-life situation. So just know the difference between living will and advance directives are not necessarily interchangeable. You do not need to seek the assistance of an attorney to complete a power of attorney, but you can do that if it makes you feel better and if you just want to close any loopholes on it. After completing the forms for this, and a lot of them they're held at the hospital. I know I've done this, and Theta Care has my copy on file. You can have two witnesses verifying your signature, and make sure that if you have both a living will and a power of attorney that they don't conflict. The last thing you want is any more confusion. And upon our living will or power of attorney, you can cancel or replace these forms at any time. What you think of right now may not really be what's going to happen in 15 years. You can change those things. So those are not, they don't necessarily have to be taken care of by a lawyer or incur any kind of legal fees. Okay, do not resuscitate orders. This is a request to have CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, if your heart stops or if you stop breathing. Advanced directives do not have to have a DNR in them. To me, this is kind of important too. At my age, I don't want to have a do not resuscitate on any of my reports. I might have a heart attack. I want somebody to try to wake me up. But if you are in a declining situation and a DNR can be added at any time to your paperwork. So, and your doctor will know that as well. So don't feel pressured into making premature decisions in your paperwork right now at this time. You don't know the circumstances. You don't know what's going to happen. The next one is personal medical information. Write down and have information on your emergency contacts, your doctor, major illnesses and surgeries. Most of this should probably already be in your records with the doctors, but sometimes stuff is hard to find. And if you just have this written down in your binder, major illnesses, surgery, allergies, medication, your dentist. Under here is organ donation specifications. I'm going to touch on this just for a minute too. A lot of people are okay donating organs that you can't see. They're okay with a heart, they're okay with liver, they're okay with kidneys. But there's also things like eyes and skin and bones and other things like that that you may not be as comfortable with, depending on your situation. This is the place to be specific. If you're fine with knowing that you're with the Lord and anybody that can benefit is fine, then that's fine. But just know that you have options. And if somebody doesn't know, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to do anything. Or if they can't find your driver's license, they're not going to know anything. So, next slide, advisors. Have a sheet that lists advisors and important people with who you do business with. Have your pastor's name on this. A pastor should know when you're struggling, when you're in difficulty. And we had a situation at our church this winter where the man passed away, faithful member of our church, and nobody contacted the church for 2 or 3 weeks. And because it was stormy and the pastor hadn't gone to visit, it was 3 weeks before the pastor even knew. And any of our congregation, nobody knew. So make sure that your pastor is on that list of advisors so that they have at least his and her contact information. Financial people, legal people, medical people, your accountants. They all just need contact information, even if you don't have any other details, just contact information. Next slide, finances, bills, assets. You need to have documents that detail your personal finances, details about your bank account, automatic deposits and withdrawals. This can take a little while to do. It took me a little while to do. I went down my bank statement and picked out all the automatic withdrawals. I went through my credit card statement. It at least helps somebody going through your affairs to know in the next even couple weeks what's got to be taken care of and what's going to be happening, an overview of all of this. Annuities, credit cards, vehicle information, real estate and mortgage information, loans, retirement accounts, all of these. At least write the information down. I know this seems a little overwhelming. It doesn't have to be, because once you get this down, you'll take a deep breath just knowing that this stuff is at least written down. Pensions, VA benefits, military retirement, Social Security payments, and other assets. If you're in the military, make sure that information is written down. There are many benefits that a spouse doesn't necessarily know you are eligible for, and you're filing, and some of that stuff has been filed for a long, long time, and it's hard to come out with. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later too. Next slide, finances, real estate, list location, mortgage, rental and landlord information. If you have multiple properties, if you have rental units, if you are renting from somebody, make sure that people know the contact information for all of those things. Retirement plans, military records, copy of Social Security card. This is one that sometimes is overlooked. You throw that Social Security number all over, but if you just make a copy of your Social Security card and keep it in your binder. Healthcare cards. There's bills that come in after you're gone, and people need to know about your healthcare information. Keep a list of all individual and group policies, including major medical and long-term disability. Information on death benefits available from your employer, death benefits available from your credit cards. This is kind of an unusual case, but sometimes your credit cards will have a line on them. If you die while flying a Delta flight and you've put it on your credit card, you get $15,000 or some random amount. If you have anything like this, it's just a little off the ordinary that somebody wouldn't know, scour your stuff and figure it out. Mary Kelly, the author of this study, gave an example. Her husband had been married before, and he had a life insurance policy that he'd taken out when he was like 20 years old. You know how they cost like $3 and you get $150,000 worth of benefits? He had one of those that she came across. Guess who the beneficiary was? His ex-wife. His ex-wife. But the policy was still valid. So Mary flew places to try to track down the ex-wife. The ex-wife wasn't about to give up money once she knew she had a pot of money from somebody who had just forgotten to change the beneficiary. Mary went to a lawyer, tried to work through all that detail. She never got it. There's some one-offs. If you signed anything as in your younger years that you think may still be in your files someplace, take a minute and just dig through stuff. And if you don't have anything, for heaven's sake, write down nothing else so that they're not going through everything. If it's like my dad died in 2014, and we didn't want to talk about it. We didn't want to talk in his last days about things. And he said, "Oh, you know, my passwords are just all upstairs by the computer." It took us weeks to try to figure out that it wasn't the right case for the passwords. It was just a mess. It was a mess. And so take care of all that kind of stuff. Make sure you review these. Make sure you have the right person designated as your beneficiaries on all of your forms. your IRAs, your insurance on all your forms. Okay, we're going to switch gears here and talk a little bit about memorial and burial and remembrances. I don't know if this is the fun section or if this is the really gruesome section. You decide on that. It's natural not to want to think about your own funeral. It's natural. And yet, those of you that have gone through this with loved ones know how important it is. And it's a very emotional time. And for you not to be able to be present for the living people in your life who've coming because you're so consumed with the details of taking care of this other stuff, it's a very difficult situation to begin. And people will often say the whole funeral is just a blur. It's just a blur because it's such an emotional time. If you have a lot of these things already taken care of, you can be present for the people who matter to you. You can be sharing stories and having fun and laughing at a life well lived if you're not trying to figure out if they're really happy in that pink casket that you picked out. Yeah, there's some weird stuff. Look. So it's possible to make many prearrangements so that your survivors don't have to do that. How many of you have investigated prepaid funeral plans or anything like that? So several of you. Even if you choose not to prepay, you can still pre-plan. For many people, it feels like there's an overwhelming amount of things to think about. But in reality, if you're just taking time to go ahead and work through this stuff ahead of time, it feels really good because you're not having to have this constantly churned up in your mind. So according to the National Funeral Directors Association, the average cost of a funeral in the United States in 2021 was $9,420. That is from the National Funeral Directors Association. That includes viewing and burial, basic service fees, transporting remains to a funeral home, a casket, embalming, and other preparations. That does not include burial or your final headstone. So that's the kind of money that a typical funeral. I checked with our local funeral home in Wapaka, Holly Funeral Home in Maple Crest. The cost was around $7,000. So it might be the difference between an East Coast versus a Midwest funeral. I don't exactly know. And it may be burial costs and some other things that are figured into there. I will say that all funeral homes in Wisconsin must have a general price list. And that list, don't feel like you're being cheap by asking how much stuff costs. It's expensive. It's expensive to feel like you don't have control over things or you're dishonoring a person because you're not getting the mahogany casket versus the plastic Barbie casket. I don't know what. I'm just saying, when you're investigating for your own self or for your spouse ahead of time, don't be afraid to ask costs. We recommend you compare funeral prices from one funeral home to another. Funeral prices can and do vary quite significantly. So let's talk a little bit about cremation versus burial. Again, it's kind of a sensitive subject. This is kind of a strange one. Costco delivers caskets in 3 days. It's shipped to the funeral home of your choice. The price is $800 to $1,800. When I went on the website a couple days ago, there were a whole bunch at $1,350 for caskets. You could actually get a casket at Costco. I would never think it. And if you've got at least 3 days notice, I don't know. You got to think about it. I don't know. You can spend a lot of money. On caskets. That's probably one of the biggest upsells, I would say, in funeral homes. Cremation. Typical cremation funeral service costs in the region of $4,000. Those are national prices, and that's the type of cremation service that replaces a full traditional funeral. However, it's possible to arrange a cremation for considerably less than that. A direct cremation can be arranged in Wisconsin for about $1,000 to $3,000, and it's the least expensive cremation option for a family. So if you don't want a refuel of any sort, you want to just have the funeral home or someone pick up the body, cremate it. There's a mandatory 48-hour waiting period. And then they file the paperwork, they get all their paperwork in order, and that's how cremation is. So there's no viewing or anything like that with the least expensive $1,000 to $3,000 option.
Hold on, Andrea. Hold on 1 minute. We do have people online, so I'm going to hold a microphone so that we're not missing out on questions.
Yeah, and we can
hear.
answer questions at the end as well.
It's not a question.
Okay,
Just save it till last time.
that's okay.
Well,
That's okay.
okay.
Go ahead.
My dad was cremated, and it costs if you want to put them in a jar or something from the funeral, but it's free if you want to put it in your favorite cookie jar.
Yes,
Cookie
yes,
jar, and
yes.
that's what he did.
Yes, yes. So the cremated remains are returned to the family then in a temporary container, and incremental options are then that you can choose various containers or put the ashes in something else. If you want them scattered, there are some requirements for that. Sometimes there aren't. You just have to go about that your own way. But really, when compared to major life events like birth and weddings, funerals are not all that expensive. When's the last time you were responsible for someone's wedding? It can be kind of pricey. But you don't bulk as much at that because it's such a happy occasion. And yet, for funerals, a lot of times you just say, there's a whole different thing because it's not a happy occasion. The cost of the funeral includes not only merchandise like caskets, but the services of a funeral director. It's a professional service. And my brother was a funeral director, and I just know the education that he took. You have to have medical knowledge for the embalming process. You have to have chemistry. You have to have cosmetology skills. You have to have business skills in order to handle the business aspect of a funeral home. You have to have social skills and psychology skills to be able to deal with all types of personalities. So you are paying with a funeral for professional service, just like anything else. And funeral homes are not there just to break even. They're there because it's their business. So just keep these things in mind as you're planning your funeral. I'm not going to say any more about that. Thank you. I'm going to set that aside here, actually. You can choose to pre-plan your funeral and put the plan on file at the funeral home. You don't need to pay for the funeral ahead of time, but if you do choose to prepay, the prices are locked in if you choose to prepay. And you won't need to pay more for items when the funeral actually happens. And I know I'm referring back more to Holly and Maple Crest because they're the ones that I'm familiar with in Wapaka. But when you pre-plan with them, the plan goes wherever you go. So no matter where you reside at the time of your passing, no matter what funeral home you choose to work with, your plan will be transferred to that funeral home if you pre-plan. Most funeral homes, I believe, are like that. So don't use the excuse, I don't know where I'm going to be when my final breath is taken. You can pre-plan ahead of time. Okay, next slide, funeral arrangements. If you're a military veteran, you're allowed to burial at a veterans cemetery at no cost. You just need to have your papers and everything in order for this. When you're thinking about your funeral, again, this is kind of morbid and kind of strange when you actually sit down at your desk and you think about it because you don't think it's going to be next week. You're thinking it's going to be 15, 20, 30 years down the line. And my wishes are going to change, at least get it down, and then you can make modifications pretty easily as things go. Figure out what kind of service you want. Do you want a full funeral service? The location, the person to officiate, open casket, closed casket. Some of that may just depend on the circumstances, I know. If you have a preference, I actually don't want to be seen. That's just my preference. So if you have anything like that, write it down. They're not going to know. Your family's not going to know. They're going to assume that everybody wants to see you one more time. Figure out clothes you want to wear, jewelry you want to wear, scriptures you want to be read, music to be played. Who's going to play it? Who's alive right now to play it? That may change. Next slide, memorial instructions and preferences. Flowers, what kind? In lieu of flowers, I want money donated to fill in the blank. Think about these things. I hate lilies. Anybody that knows me is going to know I hate lilies. I hate the smell of them. It reminds me of death. I don't want to have lilies at my funeral. If anybody reads my binder, they're going to see that in my binder. Obviously, if this church gave me a bouquet and it had lilies, I'm not going to complain. But if you don't want, $30,000 spent on flowers for your funeral, but you want fire Bibles sent to somebody, make that known. Make sure people know that ahead of time. You have your own personal wish lists and desires and heart for ministry, and this is a time to express some of that if people choose to give a donation instead of something else. Next slide, obituary. As a gift of love, take time now to write your own obituary. This is a hard one. Include your place of birth, occupations, college degree, memberships, military service, outstanding work, passions, hobbies, beloved members. Ask yourself, what would I want said about me and how? I probably won't write my own obituary. Just being frank. I have a list of everything so that somebody going in knows all of these things, but I'm not going to tell them what kind of a person I am. I'm not going to bring my own whatever. I want somebody else to say those things to me. I want people to say she was a person of integrity. She loved the Lord with all her heart. She gave unselfishly to missions. I want people to say that. I'm not going to write that in my obituary. But I'm going to put down a whole bunch of stuff so that whoever chooses to could either write it or delete or keep it to the 5 free lines that are in a newspaper and print out the rest of it on the back of a bulletin someplace. I don't know. At least write stuff down so that somebody coming after you knows those details. Next one, funeral reception. Planning your final great party. I like this part. I don't have a hard time with this part. The important part is who is there, friends and families. If you have friends and family on your computer that you want them to know that you have gone on to your eternal reward, write that down. I know that I was in charge of this for my dad's funeral, and just trying to scrape through address books so that people would know that he was no longer with us. So make it easy for someone to come. Make it easy for someone to come in and make the phone calls and make the contact information. If there's anybody you don't want called, write that down. If you want to sneak by somebody and just let them know that you haven't died yet or something, just anybody you don't want called, make sure that that's known. The location of your party. If you've always wanted to have it out at Spencer Lake in the snack shop, then write that down. If you're okay with it being in the church hall, then write it down. If you want it someplace else, just make sure your wishes are known. I'm going to change that one. Let's see. Laying the foundation for a well thought out plan takes a bit of time. It's worth every minute of it. Write down and have access. If you have a burial plot, if you have a deed for that, make sure that somebody knows that. That's stuff that's got to be taken care of pretty much right away. And they're not going to be having time to try to dig all that stuff up. Casket type. Vault or sectional crypt. Type of service. Pallbearers. Music. I actually, and this seems morbid, I have a CD in my life binder of pre-service music that I want played from my favorite pianist. It just will make things a whole lot easier when I go for my husband or my kids or whoever to look in this and say, okay, bing, 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 bing. This is who she is. She's helped us with this stuff. Okay, let's move on. I think we've talked enough about that. Disaster plans. So this is not necessarily stuff if there's a medical emergency. This is more in case fire, flood, earthquake, hurricane. You may not be with your loved ones at this time. Map out specific plans for your family to follow in a disaster. For a fire, know the quickest route to safety. If an earthquake, a plan should be in place for meeting the rest of the family. And I've kind of talked about this with my son-in-law in Virginia. And he has said, if there's something major catastrophe that happens and communication is wiped out and end of the world type stuff, but we're not quite with Jesus yet, he said, we will make our way to Wisconsin. So you stay put in Wisconsin and we will make our way to you. Sometimes, I know it sounds ridiculous, but sometimes you got to have a big plan like that so you're not missing each other in Toledo on the way passing each other. Consider the safety of your pets. This disaster plan can have priorities for what items should be taken from the house in case it's threatened. If there are photo albums, cash, jewelry, important papers, consider telling an out-of-town friend about some of these disaster plans if it should happen. Rendezvous points to meet if you're not at home. I know that we have a small safe box that's locked. That has our important papers in it. If I knew that something disastrous was going to be happening, we can still carry it. It might take a little dolly or something, but I know that that's where my stuff is. I would grab my life binder. I would grab that safe. And if there's anything else, you want your grandma's crocheted doily as a remembrance, write that stuff down. Next slide, location of items in case of disaster. Know where your stuff is. Know where there's an extra key, handy, easily accessible. Know where your electrical breakers are. Know where your gas shutoff valve is. Know where your water shutoff is. Know where there's extra water. Know how to arm or disarm your security system. I don't know. Sometimes your husband's not always around. You need to know where the shutoff valves of stuff are. By the time you get somebody to help you, it can be too late. So just be prepared. Checklist. Have contact information for your gas company, your electric company, your phone company, cell phone, cable, internet, water, trash. It doesn't take anything for you just to write down phone numbers and contact information for any of these informations. Important papers. Make sure that your safe box or your place or your binder has marriage licenses, divorce papers, separation agreements, death certificates, adoption papers. Have them easily accessible and not in a whole big old file with a million file folders that you got to try to figure out where that one is. Make copies if you need to, but just have everything in one place so that it's easy to find. Employment information. If you're currently working Or if you're volunteering on a regular basis, make sure you write that stuff down so that when you're gone for a couple weeks, people are going to want to know where you are. If they know right away, oh yeah, by the way, she died last night and she's not there to do her important volunteer work, that's there. Important papers, passwords. This is a little tricky. My husband's an IT guy. He's a computer guy. And he is, we don't like to have information on our computer like passwords because identity theft is just so easy to happen. So the way I've chosen to do this is I don't have an electronic list of all my passwords hidden anywhere on my computer or on my hard drive because I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. I'm afraid I'm going to get hacked. There's things, somebody can come in and steal all your stuff anyway physically. But I actually have a sheet where I have handwritten all of my passwords, all of my information. If somebody needs to know anything, and I keep a copy of that folded up and sealed in an envelope in the back of my life binder. The tricky part about this is stuff changes. Stuff changes through your whole binder that you're going to have. And I've just made it a practice every January. I go through my binder and I update it the first part of January. That's just part of my habit, is just update things like this. And so you can handle your passwords, but it is terribly frustrating to know that you cannot get off of the cable bill for your dad because you don't have his password, and you can't get through on a phone, and it's just very frustrating because you are so used to doing things on the computer. Make it easier for your friends. Make it inaccessible for somebody coming in trying to steal it, however. Okay, the final one, order information. If you choose, you can order the workbook that lists and has pages for each one of these areas that I have covered. It's $29.95 for the bound workbook. You can get a super duper one for $39.95, and that's tabbed and everything else. I have chosen to do this by paying $29.95 for a PDF download because I've got that on my computer, and then every January, if there's 4 or 5 pages I have to print out, I just reprint them. So that's what I have chosen to do. You do not need to buy a thing. This is if you choose to, you can do it. I don't make any money off of it. I'm not getting a commission. I actually set on the back table here the full PDF in a binder. It's just a black dumb binder. It's not fancy. It doesn't even have a title page on it, but you can look through to see the kind of material that it is if you decide to go that way. Otherwise, this checklist, just go down. You can go down each one of these checklists and figure out what's pertinent and what's important to you. So do I have any questions that I can answer anyway? We'll have to see if I can answer them or not. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to come with a microphone. Hold on. I need you to speak into this because of our online.
Okay. You kind of touched on it with the password thing, but I know even just trying to change a gas bill or ask a question, because it's always done in your husband's name, or is usually how that goes, and I'm like, well, we share it, yada, yada. How do you even get into that stuff? You know, the gas and electric, those utility bills seem to be,
Yeah. So the question is, how do you get into bills that may be in your spouse's name or need other kind of information? Almost all of our stuff is done in both of our names. I purposely added ours to the gas bill to do that, but I also have access to everything that my husband has. So he has his list of passwords that are there, and we go back and forth between each of our password lists for these things. So, for instance, the cable bill, even if it is in only one of your names, the cable bill is a strange thing. You would think you're paying millions of dollars with the security they put to try to get off of your direct cable. You have to have a death certificate in order to get off a cable bill. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But yeah, it's crazy. You can't just stop some of those services.
Okay, another.
I don't know if that helped you or not, but
I could have sworn only one person was allowed on there.
I just want to say, as I was listening to this, my husband died 3 years ago, and I've been going through a lot of this. First of all, it's kind of stated on here, but I didn't understand that the power of attorney is both for health care and for finances, is for while you are living. And that the personal representative, I think it's called, is the person and the issues after your spouse, if we're talking spouse here, passes on. And those are two different things, and they're handled in different ways. And then I wanted to say pay attention to how things, and Karen just alluded to that, how things are stated on your car titles, on your deeds, on all of that, and I found, now you find this out for yourselves, but I found that if it says, in my case, Roger or Karen Schultz, I'm okay. But if it says Roger and Karen Schultz, that's a whole nother story. Then everything has to be included, or part of it, in his estate and so forth. So that's a very little, but I think important thing to know when your spouse passes on.
excellent point. The either or and for your statements, particularly your house, particularly your big ticket items. But it can even be on ordinary bills and things like that. And again, some of that I think can be taken care of in a trust because it's bundled up together in a trust that is all under the either or. Did that not happen with you? The trust issue takes care of a lot of the spousal things. And the other thing that I found between will and trust as we were trying to figure out which was the right one for us, if you have a will and it goes to probate, it can take a long time, even in an uncontested will, for things to get settled. Anybody that is a beneficiary for that has to physically sign off on whatever they're getting. And in our case, we have a child who's overseas, inaccessible. They're not going to be able to do that. But our trust contains it all. Also, with a will, if there's disbursements made, it's done in one lump sum. Boom, boom, boom. And sometimes that one lump sum throws the beneficiary into actually a lot of chaos, depending on how responsible they are, for one thing. But another is they may be getting certain benefits based on their income level, and all of a sudden they get dumped on for this 1 year. They're no longer eligible for some of those services that they have depended on for their whole life. And so that's the difference between having a will and a trust. A trust is contained together. If one spouse dies, it's just automatic, it's seamless, and then money can be dispersed in a more logical order on the way out. It's not just a one lump sum disbursement. I don't know if that helps anybody or not decide that. Any other questions?
Yes, I'm in the process right now of moving my dad from my house to assisted living, and we've already set up several years ago a funeral arrangement, but we didn't put any money aside for funerals. But now that the person at the facility where he's moving suggested we put that money aside right now, because if at some point he uses up the money he has, then he becomes ward of the state, or however they work that. Then that money, he wouldn't have any funeral money. So we're going to, in the process right now, we're going to go see the funeral director and put the money aside. But what I'm wondering is, like, say if years ago we did put that money aside when we made the arrangements, where does that money go? Where is that sitting? Is the funeral home making, it's a trust or is it savings where the funeral home is making money on that?
No, it's a savings trust.
Okay.
I've been through that.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm hearing from, I'm not exactly sure, I can't imagine the funeral home is making a bundle of money on stuff because it's probably locked in, well, if you've prepaid, it's locked into a certain price. But go ahead.
Just got to add to that. We did that with my dad. It was a funeral trust. So the money goes into the trust account. And if there's excess of the funeral still left, then that goes back to the state if you're already on the state assistance.
Okay, good. You know, and I know with my mother-in-law and father-in-law, they were in an assisted living and coming to the end of their lives, and we chose to prepay for a funeral so that that money was taken out, and it actually lowered it so that they had some other benefits, and the state was able to come in and help them pay for their final days in the funeral home, in the assisted living. So sometimes that extra cash coming out of their account can help with their circumstances in their final days. Go ahead.
I just wanted to offer one more option. We recently went through this with my stepdad that died, and the option that we had chosen was called life science, and it's where the body can be utilized for science purposes, and then afterward is cremated. There was no cost for the cremation or anything. They took care of that afterward. The only thing that we had to pay for was the transportation, which was like $85 to transport him, and they paid for the cremation. And so then they'll deliver the remains back to the cremation, or the cremation place will hold them, we pick them up, and then we can, go from there with it. Just another option.
Great.
Life science.
Oh, Julie.
So I worked for an assisted living for the last 30 years. So I've been through a lot of funerals. I'm sure you have. But there's a few things that I've noticed. Like the funeral planning, depending on how you do it. If you do your prepay at the funeral home, it's a life insurance policy. Those prices are not set according to what my mom did a couple of years ago, because it's more of a life insurance policy. So if you take out $10,000 and it costs you $10,000 or less, you have it paid for. If it costs $12,000 at the time you die, you will still owe. So, but you're right when you say if you put it in a trust ahead of time or you take that out, you don't get Medicaid to pay for your stuff unless your assets are $2,000 below. Or, you're at $2,000 or less, right? So some people, and it's like your half. So if you're a married couple and one person goes in a nursing home, his half or her half would have to be below $2,000 before you'd get Medicaid. But it doesn't include the house and the car. They don't want to leave the surviving spouse destitute. So, if you put your money aside or you do something as if you're going to expect that person back to fix up the house or something, that helps get that half down also. What else was I going to say? Oh, I was going to mention about the CPR too.
Yes.
So we have an assisted living place and there's about 60 residents. And years ago, we went through with them and had them pre-plan stuff like this. And the nurse that we had on staff at the time, she said, just so you know, CPR is very violent. When they do that, she said, you will likely have experienced broken sternum, broken ribs. Mm-hmm. And so she convinced most of them to go on a DNR. Out of our 60, we have 4 that have not chosen that. So at a certain point in your life, you might want to just choose that because it's not pretty.
Exactly. And I will say that's absolutely true. I think when you're in that kind of a situation where you are in assisted living, where chances are there's not another stop outside of the assisted living, then those are certainly things to consider. And I will say, I think it may depend on the funeral home as well as to how locked in your prepaid ones are. That may be an individual funeral home. You got to trust your funeral home. And I know, Sharon, you said that the one that you usually recommend at this church is Yes. And Winnick Funeral Home, they trust Winnick Funeral Home. There's other funeral homes as well.
Yes.
And you have to be able to trust your people because there's important decisions. Go ahead.
Also important when someone does pass away that you get extra death certificates. Because at the time of the death, the first one you pay, I don't know, $20 for, and each one is $2 after that. But if you run out and you have to have it redone, now you got to pay the higher cost again.
Good point. So if you did not hear getting extra death certificates, when you have to send a death certificate to get your cable bill shut off, you want to have extra death certificates because some stuff is pretty crazy.
So how many should you order? Hey.
He's saying about 12. He's saying 12 or so. So, I would say that's probably about right. That's probably. Oh, she said her dad got one for each of the kids so that they have that. Okay.
Usually work.
Copies don't work? Okay.
Especially
An official seal.
Especially if they have a credit card, you have to pay it and send them a death certificate. My husband passed away in 2004, and I recommend we had him cremated and re-rented the casket. I did not buy one.
Yeah. And we did that with my dad. It's a rent-a-casket. It looked great. It was wonderful. We had a full funeral for him and then cremation. You can either choose to have them cremated before you have a memorial service or after, or nobody knows what's in the urn. You can stick the urn out there and have the memorial service and nobody knows that he's not there yet. So, go ahead. One more question, then we'll finish up.
Even though you might have a beneficiary, you should always have another person set aside or even on paperwork, because you never know what could happen to that person, and it always has to equal 100% when you're doing anything of that nature. So just, that information, when I'd planned, I didn't realize that I could have more than one person, and then if something happened to that person, it goes to the next person, just in case.
Okay.
Secondary, contingent.
Okay, have extra beneficiaries so that it's, okay. One more. I don't want to take up too much of your time, so.
Just another comment, some of my dad's accounts, we were able to do payable on death instead of having to worry about so if you had the designated family member that was going to disperse it, if your family's honest, not all families are honest. So me and my sister, so it was, we're the payable people, but that also eliminates probate.
Payable on death. Good. I don't know very much about that. I'm going to have to do some research.
Okay, Karen, did you have, okay.
I was just going to say another kind of a morbid, interesting thing as you're making decisions. I did talk to the funeral directors, and they had said that cremation will allow 2 people to share a spot, whereas standard burial, you're only allowed 1 person per spot.
Yes, and there are times that they can actually put an urn on top of a casket or in top of, from what I understand, for some of those things. So, okay. All right, thank you so much. I have enjoyed being with you. You know what, let me just close in prayer. So, Lord, you have been with our conversation this morning. And some of these things, they can just stir up some real uneasiness. And I just pray, Lord, that your presence will be with us. And as we plan out the remaining lives, we may be doing this for nothing because you will be coming soon. We don't know. But I pray, Lord, your peace upon every person who is here today, Lord, that your peace will rest upon them, that if there are regrets and there are things that they don't know what to do with, Lord, we give them to you today. And we thank you, Lord, that you are in control of all things. There is nothing that takes you by surprise. And so we just pray that your Holy Spirit will be with us now as we go from this place, and that you will give us the courage to make some decisions and to pre-plan and to help our families so that the end of our lives will not be chaotic and disruptive and uneasy for anyone, Lord. We put all of this in your hand, and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, let's express our appreciation for Karolyn coming in today. Great information. And I like the life binder. Take it, go home, start creating it. She's got one back there that you can look at. I also know that Lisa Clements came with hers. She went ahead and you've already ordered yours. So if you want to stop back there or hover over here around Lisa, take a look at that. Just in closing, I do want to thank our ELS team that kind of put all this together today and the refreshments in the back. And just thank you, Joanne and Joy and Diane and Daylene. Joanne, I think you baked cookies all night long, so be sure to get a cookie or a muffin back there. Also want to express appreciation to Connie on ProPresenter, Julie for handling our online guests here today, church family that joined us, and then those of you that enjoyed having your children cared for this morning, just give appreciation to Mary Strong. That's a gift to us this morning that she wanted to provide. So God bless you guys. Thank you for being here. And what's that, Andrea? Okay. Great. You can go see Andrea if you want to see what she's got there. So I know it's been worthwhile. So now let's make plans to leave our family with what they need in case when that day comes. So God bless you guys. Have a good rest of your Saturday.